Well, good morning. How we doing today? We okay? Okay, we got 3 people doing okay. That's awesome. We're doing that. That's 3 more than 10 minutes ago, probably. So that's good. That's very good. My name is Cory, and that female who was up here earlier who stole my name is my wife. So if you're new with us, we have the same name. I just wanted to clear that up. We're Cory, and then we got married, and now we have the same last name, and it's confusing for everyone except us, okay? So let's clear that up. It's so good to be with you in the flesh today. Last week, I was a part of church online. My son, Charlie, was playing in a hockey tournament in Detroit. They lost in the finals in a shootout. Just terrible. But last week, I just want to say a thanks to those of you that are a part of the live stream and video and the technology, the people that we don't see lots of times that make it possible for us to stay connected with our community when we're traveling or we're being with our kids like we ought to be. So I'm really thankful for that crew today. Today, I want to talk about what might be controversy might be the strong way to say it, but I want to talk about this tension that sometimes exists in the way we understand Jesus. Sometimes Jesus can sound really inclusive and hospitable. It's actually the part of Jesus I prefer to talk about more. It's a part of Jesus I'm really drawn to. But then other times, when we're reading the Gospels, we might just skip a part or two. Right? Because Jesus doesn't sound so inclusive. That sometimes he can sound a little bit exclusive, right? Or that he's pushing people away. And I think this conversation is important because I think churches tend to take on the culture of how they understand Jesus. That some of us, churches, want to kind of project this really hospitable, inclusive Jesus. This is probably how we bend as a church, right? We probably lean this way, if we're being honest, right? And because that's how we like to think about Jesus. But then other churches like to think about Jesus as, and maybe exclusive is the wrong word. Probably folks in this camp would think about Jesus as this cost to discipleship. Like you want to follow Jesus, it's going to cost you something. Because both of these are represented. Maybe let's look at some of this, right? So there's actually a run in the book of Luke where there's 3 people that actually want to follow Jesus, and in no kind of roundabout ways, Jesus tells them no. Check this out. Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 57. As Jesus and his disciples traveled along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replies to him, "Foxes have dens, and the birds of the sky have nests, but the human one has no place to lay his head." Then Luke right away tells a story of someone else. Then Jesus said to someone else, "Follow me," he replied. "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and spread the news of God's kingdom." Seems like a fair request, doesn't it? He goes on. Luke is really making a point here. Tells another story. Someone else said to Jesus, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say goodbye to those in my house." Another reasonable request. Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand on the plow looks back is fit for God's kingdom." To be really honest, I don't prefer this Jesus. I much prefer Jesus, let's say like the book of John, chapter 14, verse 2 says, "My Father's house has room to spare." Love that. Matthew 11, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Come to me, all who are struggling hard and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Put on my yoke and learn from me. I am gentle and humble." I'm like, Jesus, you didn't sound gentle and humble 10 minutes ago. "And you will find rest for yourselves. My yoke is easy to bear. My burden is light." I like this Jesus. I like the Jesus who tells these stories, these parables about hosting these big banquets, right? and he invites people to come, and they're too good for the banquet. So Jesus tells the people of his house that are helping put on the banquet, just go out and invite all the people who wouldn't normally get invited to a banquet. I like that Jesus. I like the Jesus of the story of, the Good Samaritan. And there's all the people who pass by, the person on the road who's desperate for help. But the parable honors the person who stops and cares for that person. I like that Jesus. But one of the challenges of being a Jesus-centered person, and I would say that is my goal in life, is I don't think it's maybe responsible to just pick and choose our Jesus, to skip over the parts that we don't like. But I also think there's often more going on than we see. So I want to walk us through something today that maybe will help you. It's certainly been helpful for me. Jesus, I'm going to put this somewhere, I don't know, how about here? That's a good spot. So Jesus, when you're reading through the Gospels, he often finds himself in different situations. And Jesus had different forms to his life and to his ministry. I would first say that Jesus had a bit of a public life. Ooh, that was not supposed to do that. That's going to be fun later. Okay. Right? Jesus had this public form to his ministry. If you're a Bible reader or you've been hanging around church a little bit, maybe you've heard about Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount, right? He gets up on a mountain. Here, I'll put a little mountain here so we can remember it. My art is phenomenal. How's that? Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, he stands up on a mountain and he proclaims the goodness of God's kingdom, particularly the goodness for God's kingdom for those who receive the least amount of good news in his public ministry. Jesus' public ministry, he had moments where he did things like people were gathered listening to him speak on the side of a mountain one day, and people are getting hungry, and the disciples are like, send them away, they're hungry. And Jesus is like, no, let's feed everybody. And he feeds 5,000 people one day and 3,000 people another day. Like, I love these stories. So Jesus has this public ministry. But then Jesus has this part of his life that functions a little bit more in like a social space. There's parts of Jesus' story. Maybe you remember a time when he had his disciples and some people that were hanging out with him. And he says to them, I want you to go into the villages surrounding this area. And I want you to go and pray for people who are sick. I want you to go and help people who are hungry find some food. I want you to go and go ahead of me and start just serving people and loving people. But I want you to go with a posture that also receives hospitality. So you're not going just to give something to someone, but you're also going to go out and receive. It's like a social space where there's giving and there's receiving. You might remember in this passage is one of my favorite lines. Jesus sends them out to do all these things and then goes, and eat what's set before you. When you step into their homes, when you're with someone who's in need, you don't need to impose your way on them, but to be hospitable and to receive hospitality. See, Jesus had this mode in the public space of proclaiming God's kingdom, this good news. And then he had this mode in a social space that was giving and receiving. The power dynamic existed on both sides of the table. But then Jesus had this close circle, we'll call it. It was a bit of a personal circle. In here is really where you have Jesus' 12 disciples and some other people. We'll say 12 plus. But this is a group of people that Jesus was training. He was teaching them. He was preparing them to go through a very specific time that was ahead. See, Jesus knew that he was on his way to be crucified, to be mocked and ridiculed, to be beaten as an example by the state. And he knew that eventually he would not be here anymore. And that there would be some people who need to carry on his legacy, who would need to live out this kingdom in which he was proclaiming, and this hospitality in which they were modeling. Some people were going to have to lead this in the next generation, this generation that we call today the church. And so on the days that Luke was talking about in that passage of scripture, individuals were coming to him saying, I want to follow you. That's code language for I want you to be my teacher. I want to journey with you in this season. I want to be trained by you, Jesus, to do the things that you are calling your disciples to do. But first, I need to go. I need to bury my father. Well, how long is that going to take? See, because Jesus in this space was preparing a particular amount of people for a specific time and for some specific things that were about to happen. And so if you're going to go and bury your father, there's no indication whether or not this father is even dead or alive. If you're going to go take care of the affairs of your family, well, we're doing something here and we're on a bit of a timeline. I don't think that's going to work. Oh, you want to come and follow me? Are you aware that me and my disciples often sleep on the ground? That often we go into places that are hostile towards us. And what I'm preparing these disciples to lead in will be a very hostile environment. See, the church often calls this space, or what Jesus is doing in this space, as discipleship. One of the challenges of doing church is that we don't live in the same time and place as Jesus and his disciples. That what we are learning to do as people, that if you want to be discipled in the way of Jesus, it's actually with these people at this time and in this place. And in this space, there certainly has to be some kind of commitment and buy-in to these people at this time and in this place. That commitment might not be that we're going to sleep on the ground 50 nights a year. That commitment might not be we're going to go barrel into the middle of a city and a couple of us are going to get murdered. Like, that might not be the commitment for us. But there is this culture of discipleship that exists here. And so when we think about church, maybe you've been hanging around church your whole life and you're like, why do we do things the way we do them? Well, lots of times, somewhere back in the thresholds of some dusty old book somewhere, it's because of Jesus. That actually, as a church, we also have a public space. You're sitting in it right now. That we gather together here on Sundays. Proclaim the kingdom of God. This is the world that Jesus imagines for us, like here and now in this place with these people. That it's in this space that we feed people who are hungry. That it's in this space that we welcome people and are hospitable to people. You know, like, it was actually in this space where Jesus sometimes also spoke harsh language, but only towards those who are trying to keep people away. So part of our calling as a church is in our public spaces to be incredibly hospitable. So I'm so thankful for the teams of people that come in here early every Sunday, make coffee and put a smile on their face, even if they're exhausted from the night before. Welcome people at the door. The band who is in here super early on Sunday mornings, getting ready for the morning to host us in a time of singing. Right? There's a hospitality vein that runs through everything we do here on a Sunday morning. Why? Well, we learned that from Jesus. It's in this space that we invite people not to take the biggest steps of their faith, but to take some of the earliest steps of their faith. That here at our church, we practice open communion. That we invite people, if you would like to come to Jesus' table and take communion, we'd love to have you. That we invite people to take an early step of baptism. If you want to be baptized into this, you want to start taking steps towards Jesus, Baptism is a great place. We celebrate baptism here in our midst. But then we also have, as a church, this social space, right? That we invite people to begin to serve other people with other people. Not in a way that lords over people, but interacts with people. That we share in hospitality. That this part of this space is participating in tables, right? Some people love tables. Some people don't. Everyone should be a part of one. Why? Because it's in tables that for 6 weeks, this is how tables work here. For 6 weeks, you get put into a group of people. Some of them you'll like, some of them you won't. And guess how long it is? I already told you. It's only 6 weeks, right? But it's actually in this space where we learn together, we practice together what it is to eat what's set before you. I don't prefer this person's politics. Do I really have to sit with them at a table? Yeah, because that's part of what Jesus is doing in the world. That person lives at a different, maybe socioeconomic place than I do. And there's some social norms that are tied with the different socioeconomic places we live in. It makes it a little bit awkward. Do I really have to sit at a table with them? Yeah, yes, because this is where we learn to eat what's set before us, to host one another. This is why around here we encourage people to be a part of some of the teams, right? To take this step and begin to serve other people with other people. It's not about getting some gold star on your Jesus chart, right? Nobody's getting like a little extra payoff in heaven when you get there because you're on a team at Westwinds Church. It's because we're being formed. We're practicing this together. What is it like to serve next to somebody in our church who otherwise I might not even like them? But we gather together in this space and we practice hospitality with each other. But then as a church, there are some spaces that are a little bit more close, even what might feel closed at times. If you want to be, let's say, an elder at our church, well, that requires a commitment. We ask our elders to commit to 5 years. And there's a process. To become an elder at our church, someone has to recommend this person's name because they bear witness to how they love our community. And then our current elders go through a discernment process that really can drag out as long as it's needed. We wait for God's direction to lead us to the next person. And then that person has to agree to say, yeah, I want to serve our church in this way for 5 years. I'll show up to meetings. I'll be a part of our church. I'll be available to people to listen and to learn, to discern what God is doing in our church. At a little simpler level, we have something in our church called a centering community. It's a group of people who in our community will come together and are part of the sustenance or the sustaining nature of what it means for us to be a church. But we actually have some boundaries on that community. We say if you want to be a part of our centering community, you have to be able to acknowledge that you have a sense of commitment to these people. That's the people to your left and to your right. You have a sense of community to these people. You're not just going to ghost when it doesn't feel good or something makes you upset, right? That you've got a sense of commitment to this place, and we're not talking about this building. We're talking about Jackson County. That we are a local church. That our calling as a church is to be in this place and serve these people. So you have a sense of commitment in your life to say that I'm here in this county on purpose, that I move through the world in a way open to how God might want to engage me. And then we would say that you also need to have a sense of commitment to the way of Jesus, that I want to be, that I'm choosing to continuously, for the rest of my life, take steps towards Jesus. Why? Well, we kind of learned that from Jesus. Jesus, I want to be a part of what you're doing with these people in this time, in this place. And Jesus said, well, there's like a thing going on here. Like we're doing something together. And actually what I need most from this group of people is to be able to serve and care for and hold down the fort for the next group of people, to give their lives away at this moment in time, to be hospitable to those who might come along in the next moments of time. Oh, but first I need to take care of, I actually need to go into, I can't do that right now. And Jesus is like, you know what? Like, that's okay. What Jesus doesn't say, well, hey, you can't come to my family dinners anymore. No, that's not what he's saying. Hey, next time I'm feeding 5,000 people on the hillside, you could just go ahead and not take any bread and fish. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if you want to be a part of being trained in the life of Jesus with these people at this time in this place, we're doing something. And can I just say, church, if you want to be a part of being trained with these people at this time in this place, Westwinds Church, we're doing something. We're doing something. In order to continue on in the way of Jesus, we learn from Jesus, we need people to take these steps, to say, you know what? This is my church. God is inviting me and asking me to take steps to commit to these people at this time and at this place. There's actually one more space where we see Jesus engage. That Jesus also had these really intimate, personal moments and friendships with people. If you read in the Gospels, you can read some moments where Jesus pulls away with Peter and James and John, and they have these conversations that are a little bit more vulnerable. There's a couple parts in the Gospel where Jesus appears to pull away from the disciples and go hang out with his friends Mary and Martha and Lazarus. That he has this kind of close, tight-knit relationship with them. Perhaps where he's a little bit more vulnerable and open. And I think this happens in church too. That if you spend time, if you grow in your sense of commitment, that from these spaces often ends up some of the most important relationships that you may ever have in your entire life. That if you're paying attention, it's common here on a Sunday for people to move towards the lobby. And if you start looking around, there's like often like 2 or 3 people sitting over here or sitting over here that are having maybe a deeper conversation, maybe even a little more vulnerable in life. And I think this is true in our personal lives as well. I don't know your experience, but often what happens is people begin to engage in these spaces. And somewhere along the journey, people start saying things like, man, I think I've got this like personal relationship with Jesus. You ever heard anyone talk about that before? Or they'll have a moment where you feel like God is really present in your life, really close to you. Like there's like an intimacy with the divine that is new and different than anything you've ever experienced before. Different generations of the church have found different ways to talk about it, but I'd rather just speak of it like, you know the experience I'm talking about? That sometimes you could actually be sitting in a really public space like this, but you have a really intimate moment with God. That sometimes you could be at a table or serving on a team with people, and inside of that somewhere there's like this really close sense of God's presence in your life. That sometimes you end up in a place where you begin to feel really connected and really committed to the church that God has invited you to be a part of. And inside of that is this really intimate or close sense of God's presence. Maybe you've got some friendships and you're just like, every time I'm with them, I just sense God in the space that exists between us. And what begins to happen over time is that Jesus wants to start to show himself in all these other areas of your life. That even outside of your local church, that you've got some close friends. Maybe this crew that you kind of run with. Sometimes that crew changes in seasons. You know, anyone else look at their wedding pictures and all the people that stood up with them? You're like, we were close then. Glad you're in the photo, right? But we have these seasons where we end up running with a really close crew of people. And in those seasons, man, you would give anything for those people. You know these people I'm talking about? And then you have spaces that are this kind of shared hospitality space. I can tell you, for me, this space for me, it's always somehow ended up the rink, the hockey, right? This weekend, right? I'm gathering with a group of people this weekend. Our kids all play on a hockey team together, and we're at hotels together, and we're at the rink like 4 or 5 times a week together, right? We spend all of this time together in this social space. In this space where we actually start looking out for each other's kids. We start knowing what's going on in each other's lives, right? And I find that over time, we live in these public spaces as well, right? We have these public spaces for some of us growing more and more. This public space sometimes is like the internet. I don't know if this is gonna be good for us or not, but it's where it is, right? This public space is maybe some of the ways we present ourselves around things like our opinions about things. But we present ourselves in this public way. And what's incredible is that when we take a step back, you're like, what does it mean to live in the life of Jesus? Well, we can actually begin to look at the life of Jesus. And then we can mimic that. This is what we do as a church. We practice this together. And over time, Jesus begins showing up in these exact same spaces in our life. And you're like, well, if I want to be a follower of Jesus, what should I do? Well, I think I'd just start right where you're at. And think about, what is my next step? Where do I go next? How does this play out? And I think you can see that how following Jesus is not like a class or a quick plan. You can see how throughout your life, you begin to see Jesus show up in different ways, and then the season changes, and all of a sudden, your life is different. All these things change, and you guys start to reimagine how God might show up in those spaces, or your church changes. You start looking around, you're like, I don't know half these people, right? And so you begins to shift again. And this walk with Jesus, this discipleship, keeps forming around these people in this place, at this time, centering Jesus. My family came to faith later in life. I was 7 when my family came to faith. And there was this family. My spiritual grandfather passed away just like 3 weeks ago. I wasn't expecting to tear up about this, but this family who kept inviting our really messed up family into their house, around tables, into their social space. And over time, my parents began asking questions about Jesus, and they started talking about, what does it look like to follow Jesus at this time, in this place, with these people? And then my parents ended up at an Amway convention. Someone got something at Amway. And I told that joke in West Michigan, not realizing. Anyway, just daddy ears and lots of tomatoes. And but they went to a Sunday morning service at an Amway convention. And the pastor gave them an opportunity to invite Jesus into their life. But they had the context of being at Alan and Lois's kitchen table and sitting around their couches and tables talking about Jesus in this time. And my parents at that moment invited Jesus to come into their life and changed everything for us. Our whole family. We started going to church, right? And I remember we started going to church, and it was a new experience. The people were odd, but they were so kind. And they really cared about us. It was like peculiar experience. But there was something about it that just wanted us to keep coming back. And then I remember being invited into these social spaces. We started going to this church. It was called Streetsville Baptist Church. And there was this family that after church would invite people over to their house. And on their way, they would just buy these like giant rolls. They called them kielbasa rolls. They're like these huge gobs of bread, and they would fill them with peanut butter and jam. And then all of us kids would go down in the basement and we'd watch Free Willy and eat peanut butter and jam kielbasa rolls together. I don't know if you remember at the end of Free Willy 1, there's like Michael Jackson's music video, right? And he's like going out, right? So here I am like learning about Jesus in the basement of these churchgoers' house through peanut butter and jam kielbasa rolls, Free Willy and Michael Jackson, right? This is how it works. This is how social space works. And then eventually as a kid, I start growing up and I get invited into these closed or close spaces where people start teaching me about Jesus. And I get to wrestle, I get to talk with actual human beings about the teachings of Jesus and what they might actually mean in my life with the people that I walk with at this time. And this is how it continues to go. And I imagine today you could find your story in here somewhere as well. So here's the call. Here's the commitment. I had notes and then just left them over there. Is I wonder where you might identify. We're all at least here. And in this space, we invite people to sing with us. We invite people to pray with us in a way that you can choose your proximity. I might stand up here and pray, and some of you in the room are engaging and agreeing. Some of you are just listening and analyzing. This is a great space to try Jesus. It's a great space to taste Jesus, right? To consume at the table this bread and this wine that we have together, to participate, to practice, to give it a shot. But when there's these moments of wanting to begin to take steps, right? Maybe you start to want to move this way. And I would say maybe you want to show up to a newish gathering. Right? Or maybe over the next couple weeks say, you know what, I'm going to take a step and begin to engage with Jesus on a social level. I'm going to give 6 weeks. 6 weeks, okay? And I'm going to sign up blind and get put into a table with people for how long? It can't be that bad. It's 6 weeks, okay? Or maybe you're going to say, I'm going to sign up and be a part of a team. I'm going to start serving people with people. Some of you are nodding your head because this is your story, right? This is when you began to really engage Jesus into another space. And then it's in this social space where perhaps you're beginning to gain some more calling into the center of a community like this. You're going, I'd like to be more committed here. I'd like to be a part of what this looks like in the future. I want to help sustain this. I want to help make sure this is here for future generations. I want to help be a part of discerning what this looks like in a healthy way. And you're like, what's this centering community thing about? How could I maybe be a part of some of those moments and those decisions and that kind of sharing? And then maybe, just maybe, there's somebody around here or that person around here and you haven't opened up to somebody in a long time. And there's that pull, right? I think I trust them. I think maybe I would like to start sharing a little bit more of my life with somebody. I'd like to maybe drop some of the facades in some of my relationships. And we find that it's actually in this process, right, that we start to experience Spirit of God showing up in all of these other spaces of our lives. One more story. I'm over time. One more story. My social space is the rink, and I don't when I show up to the rink, I'm there as Coach Cory. I'm there as old man playing an old man hockey league Cory. I'm there as my kid plays hockey here, Cory. I'm not there as Pastor Cory, right? Nobody, I don't push Jesus on people. I don't act like this at the rink. I'm usually screaming and using cuss words, right? There's a whole different experience, right? And I remember throughout my life, there's been all these moments though, When just like showing up and being in this space and being open, that God would move. When I was in my early 20s, I played in this hockey league. It was called the KCHL. And it was all these guys who were really good at hockey, but because they liked the party, never went anywhere. And so there was this league, and people would pay like $5 to watch the games, and there'd be fights, and then we'd all go to the bar after, and it was like no big deal, right? And I remember there'd be like intermissions, so we'd like go off after the first period, and you'd look out the hall, and guys would be like 1 foot out the door smoking weed in the back of the rink, getting out to go play again. I mean, this was the kind of league it was. And in our town, the churches were really conservative, and so the Christians like stayed away, right? And I'm like, I love hockey, and so he invited me to play. So I played on this team called the Millstream Bucks. Yeah. And I remember being in the room one night, and this guy comes in, and he's not going to play that night because he's too drunk. And so he's sitting in the room, and he's talking very loud. And he starts asking me questions about the Bible from across the dressing room where everyone can hear, right? And so I'm now being drilled about the technicalities of Scripture from my drunk teammate in the dressing room. It was like 2 weeks later, there was this other guy on our team. We were the young guys. We were both in our early 20s. And he's like, hey, I just got my girlfriend pregnant. I'm not really sure what to do. Do I need to get my kid baptized? And then it was another season that I got a call from one of our assistant coaches' wives. Said, hey, my husband's been sober for 20 years. And he's drinking again and nobody knows. What do I do? Would you be willing to talk to us? Spend some time? It's incredible. When you begin to walk with Jesus in the different spaces of your life, how God begins to open you up to what God is doing in you and through you and around you in the wildest places. I'm going to invite the band to come up. And we're going to sing a song. And then when the song is done, I'm going to invite you to parade the lobby and figure out how you can take your next step. There's golden chairs out there. There's people that would love to help you. Maybe your next step is just to keep showing up in this space. Like, I need to keep trying this for a while. Maybe your next step is joining me for a newish gathering. You're going to go grab some breakfast and then come back at 12:15 and hang out with us and talk about what some of your next steps be. Maybe your next step is signing up for a table or joining a team. I don't know what your next step is, but our church is for anyone. And that means that our church is not for everyone. This is like really tough for me in the way I'm wired to wrestle with. But I'm learning that not everybody wants to sit around tables with people they don't like or people who don't look like them. Not everybody wants to build relationships with people who come from a different class of people than they do. Not everybody wants to show up at church, even in this space where people have different political opinions than they do. So while we're a church for anyone, we're doing a thing together here. And that might not be for everyone. But I would like us to get in trouble for like the same things that Jesus got in trouble for. Jesus, why are you sitting at tables with those tax collectors and outcasts? Why are you their friends? They don't deserve your friendship. If you're with us, you can't be with them. I want to be a part of a church that like baptizes people who want to take their first steps towards Jesus. That's how I read about in the Bible. In the Bible, people were getting baptized on this one call. Would you like to change your heart and your life? Yeah, I would. Okay, come get baptized. That's not for everyone. That kind of a church is not for everyone. I want to be a part of a church that is irrationally generous with our time in the space that we have in our lives, that we're willing to show up for people and commit to one another. I want to choose to do church in this way. And I wonder if you would choose that with me, if you'd go on this journey of discipleship that has some cost to learn and follow Jesus, but a lot of those costs exist on the hospitality side and who and how we're willing to move through our lives. Think about that as we sing. And perhaps as you go about your day today.